Should be. Now I should be able to.
Yeah, we already have 4 attendees.
Yay.
Oh, 5 attendees. Look at them all. Hello, everyone.
Yay.
We're so excited that you're here today. I see some names I don't know and some I do, so I'm glad everyone's here. So Sarah, am I on by myself now or?
I'm going to double check that.
Okay.
That you are.
Hello, attendees. We are still figuring out what we're doing, so your patience is, we're grateful for your patience, and if you have any advice for us, you can chat at us and we'll get your messages. And just to let you know, we're probably going to start a little bit late since we had some difficulties with the link, and so just hold on, and we'll get you Ellie very soon.
Sounds a little scary.
I know.
Oh dear.
Sorry.
I'm just going to repeat my spiel and say welcome to everyone. As you come in, we are still getting ourselves sorted out, and we are planning to start a little bit later. You know, we're going to give ourselves 5 or 10 minutes to let people, since we had that hiccup with the link, hoping people find their way to join us. But we're so glad you're here, and you can chat with me now if you have any thoughts or questions, and then pretty soon we're going to get our questions and answer process going too. Kathy, did you find the question answer? You did. Yes. Good. How are we looking, Sarah?
You look good.
Am I the only face visible? Because I see all of you guys. Okay. All right. All right. Well, we have 19 attendees. Oh, we got a chat. We got a chat. Oh, good. Looks like it's coming in clear, so we're in good shape. Well, we're so glad as people are joining us. We're so glad you're here, and we're gonna just be waiting a little bit to get going to allow as many people as possible to find the new link. Sorry again about the confusion with the new link. It was just a hiccup with Zoom, and thanks to the help of Reverend Erica, we got it up and going. So we're so glad, and Amy for advertising it to everyone. So we're so glad you're here. And thank you for your patience. I'll give it just a few more minutes. And while we're waiting, in just a few minutes, I'm going to start. I've got some prayers from the Book of Common Prayer to share with you that might be good resources during this time of heightened anxiety. So get your pen ready. Again, your pen and paper ready so you can write down some page numbers for those resources. And we'll begin that in just a few minutes. Welcome to those who just joined us. We're so glad you're here. So I believe the question came in through chat. Is there a way to see who's here? I believe you can go into participants perhaps and see a list of attendees. I'm not exactly sure what you can see on your side, but you might try and see if you can go into participants and then see a list of names. I can see a list of names. Okay, so not on this Zoom. So so unfortunately, from your end, you're not going to be able to see the other attendees. But we are up to 30 plus. So we've got a good group, and we're glad you're here. You could chat and introduce yourselves. Now that would be a way. You could chat to all the panelists and say, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. So that would be a way to share who is with us today. Looks like we have people from around the country, which is exciting. So you can, Wynn is here. You can click, and Sarah Nolte is here. You can click, you can also chat and tell us where you're here from today. Southern Maryland, all right. Dr. Ellie is drawing in the crowds. We knew she would. Well, it's also a very apt subject. I think we're all living with heightened anxiety these days, and so we're all looking for ways to manage our anxiety. Oh, Jackie from Atlanta, Georgia. Hey. My old stomping ground. My son is very excited to hear that. Douglasville, Georgia. Another Atlanta, Georgia, St. Anne's, all right, that's wonderful. So glad. Northern Virginia. This is wonderful. We're up to 51 participants. And it is about on the hour. We've got a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to start, and I'll just begin by sharing some suggestions for prayers that we might use. We're gonna introduce Ellie a couple about 10 minutes into past the hour, just to allow people to get here and to find the new link. And we're so glad that you made the extra effort to find the link to be with us today. So thank you. Thank you so much. We're really excited about this program. And let me introduce myself. I'm Reverend Elizabeth Rolls, and I am a priest at St. Barnabas Episcopal Church here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I am the clergy person who works with our mental health task force, which is a group of wonderful women who put together educational programs for our parish and the wider community on issues of mental health and spiritual health. And so in this time, we thought this was a program that we had on the schedule and had to postpone. And then when this pandemic came, we thought this is a really important time to talk about trauma and the global trauma that we're experiencing. And I know I can speak personally that in those first few weeks of shutdown, I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart would be racing, and I would just feel overwhelmed with anxiety. And I had to really turn to my mental health resources and get the help I needed. So this is an issue that is touching all of us, I think, to different degrees. And so it's really an important issue. And we're so glad that you have chosen to be with us today. And like I said, we're going to start a little bit later in the hour to allow people to find that link. And our commitment to you is once Dr. Ellie begins, we will stay within an hour of program time and hopefully be done by about 2:10. That's Arizona time, 2:10 Arizona time. So what I wanted to do before I introduce Dr. Ellie is just to share with you a few resources from the Book of Common Prayer. For those clergy out there, this might be very familiar to you already. To you Episcopalians, you may be pretty familiar with the Book of Common Prayer, and I hope you have one of your own. If you don't, or if you're not an Episcopalian, it's really easy to find the Book of Common Prayer online, bcponline.org, I believe. So it's very easy. If you just Google it, you'll find it. But I wanted to share a couple prayers that for me have been meaningful in this time. And you know, the wonderful thing about the Book of Common Prayer is that it does really address the issue of anxiety. And so what I have done is turn to the back to page 828 in the Book of Common Prayer. And well, that's the wrong page number. It's page 832 in the Book of Common Prayer. And there's wonderful prayers here for guidance, for quiet confidence, for protection, a prayer for self-dedication, and then the prayer attributed to St. Francis, all of which help us to find that centering peace during times of anxiety. So that would be on page 832 in the Book of Common Prayer. I commend those prayers to you. The other thought I had, you know, in my pastoral work in this time, I've really found that we're almost having two different experiences. There are those people who are sheltering at home alone and are feeling very, very isolated, unable to have human touch, unable to see friends face to face. And then there are those of us who are sheltering at home with our family, with our kids. And our experiences sometimes, I think, are really different. And it's the same. We're all going through the same thing, but in a different way because but of the different experience we're having. And I was thinking that this might be a time really where we, when we're feeling our own discomfort, that we might also think about others and what they might be going through, and then to pray for them. And to pray for, if you're someone who's by yourself in your home, you might pray for someone who is in a family situation or having their kids or having to teach their children. Or if you're in a family situation, to remember and to pray for those who are alone. And again, the Book of Common Prayer is a great resource for that. And if you turn to page 828 in the Book of Common Prayer, there's a prayer for the care of children. And there's also a prayer for those who live alone. So those would also be great prayers to share. And before I introduce Ellie, I am going to open us with a prayer. And it's one of these from page 832. And I'm going to pray the prayer for quiet confidence. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. O God of peace, who has taught us that in returning and rest, we shall be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be our strength. By the might of thy Spirit, lift us, we pray you, to your presence, where we may be still and know that you are God. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So it is now my great honor to introduce to you Dr. Ellie Izzo. Ellie is a scholar and she is a clinician. She's the author of 2 books, and she is the co-founder and core trainer for Vicarious Trauma Institute. And she has a growing and active practice with clients. Ellie is a mother and a grandmother and a wife. And I think closest to my heart, Ellie is a member of St. Barnabas Episcopal Church in Scottsdale. And she's been there for 2+ years. She found us one day as she was jogging by the church and came in to explore on a Sunday morning and came in to explore what we were about. And thank goodness she has stayed with us. And another dear thing in my heart is recently Ellie was commissioned as a lay chaplain in our community of hope at St. Barnabas. So we're so glad, Ellie, about that. But I wanted to also just tell you a story of an early experience I had with Ellie. Shortly after she came to St. Barnabas, she became a lay Eucharistic minister and started helping out with our burial services, with our memorial services. And so this was early on, and Ellie had just started this, and I was doing the burial service, and Ellie came in, and she was ready to be a lamb. I said, oh, guess what, Ellie? You're also the crucifer, and you're also the reader. And she was able to just, in a very, very non-anxious way, just turn on a dime and just be a wonderful partner in ministry with me. And I'm just so grateful that she did that. And so we're really happy that she's here. So one more thing before I turn it over to Ellie is I wanted to let you know that I'm going to be, throughout this program, I'm going to be your chat chaplain. So you can chat at me individually if you want to engage me individually, or you can chat to the whole group, and I'll be there on the chat and watching what the conversation is. And if anybody's having anything they want to talk to or any need, be sure to reach out, because we know that this isn't a real interactive process, but we wanted you to be able to reach out for help if you need it. So know that I will be there at the chat. We also have in our webinar today a question and answer feature, and Kathy is going to be fielding those questions, and she's going to be posing them. So she may be interrupting every once in a while and posing questions to Dr. Ellie. And so know that you can ask questions. and that Dr. Ellie encourages you to ask questions. But also know that we have a limited amount of time, so we may not have time to get to all of the questions. Kathy will be fielding them, and she'll let you know if your question is going to be answered in our session, or if we can hold your question and bring that to Dr. Ellie afterwards. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to our guest speaker.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And that was really an adorable reminder of the funeral service I assisted you with. And I thought I was coming just to maybe give a little communion, and it turned out to be really way more than I thought. I could have received it as traumatizing, but I breathed through it and I gave it over to God, and it worked out just beautifully. So I'm looking for our PowerPoint because we're going to start talking about the experience of traumatizing times. And I think, Sarah, you're going to put that up. Thank you so much. So as we start, I think it's important to really discuss that trauma itself is very much in the eye of the beholder. And what I may perceive or receive as a traumatizing experience may not be embraced the same way by person 2, person 3, or person 4. And there are a lot of factors why, as individuals, we see trauma through different lenses. So let's define it and move the slide along. Next one. So the definition of a traumatizing event is any occurrence that's considered outside of the range of normal human experience, and it is internalized as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening. It can have a lasting adverse effect on the individual's functioning, physically, emotionally, and socially, and really most of all spiritually. Because if we become highly anxious or depressed as a result of the stress of trauma that we are not digesting well, we start to feel some barriers to our highest thinking and our ability to connect to our God. Next slide. So in today's world, trauma has become a very complicated subject. In fact, it has its own name, traumatology. People who specialize in it are called traumatologists, and it's really now being researched and discussed in a very multi-dimensional way. So there are many forms of trauma, and there's acute trauma that happens from one single incident. Chronic trauma is repeated and prolonged. And complex trauma is exposure to numerous, multiple traumatic events in different ways, from different contacts, all at the same time, of an invasive or interpersonal nature. So, you know, the trauma we're going through right now might be coined as, well, it was acute because a virus came over to our country, but then it became chronic because it's a lot of people becoming sick. So sadly, we've lost a lot of people. They've succumbed to the virus. And then there are those of us that have other trauma experiences in our lives that are more sensitized and more triggered during these traumatizing times. We'll get to that. We'll talk to that. And so there are some names for trauma. There's PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now there's complex post-traumatic stress syndrome. That's when you personally are in the middle of a traumatizing event. Then there's secondary trauma, where you hear about the event or you talk with someone about the event. And then my specialty is vicarious trauma, whereas many of us are professional helpers, loving friends, compassionate caregivers. And what makes vicarious trauma different than secondary trauma is that when you are helping someone, you have to put the brakes on your brain's natural ability to want to become upset with them, to want to be horrified with them. You have to control that and you have to compress it. which presents its own strain. So we have a lot of doctors, nurses, medical specialists, professionals, assistants on the front lines, and secondarily that are really struggling with vicarious trauma right now. We can move to the next slide. So these are some examples of trauma events. There probably are more. And it's interesting because as we go down the list, I'm going to use my own experience. I'll use myself an example. Through the course of my life, and I'm not a spring chicken, I've really lived through numerous traumatic experiences. Hurricanes, which were disastrous when I was a younger child. I was physically assaulted by a violent client early in my career. I almost lost my youngest daughter to a grave and life-threatening illness when she was a young child. I've been held at gunpoint during a robbery. And about 2 years ago, an enraged husband of one of my clients, an enraged ex-husband, went on a shooting spree about 2 years ago. And he proceeded to gun down lawyers, legal professionals, and mental health professionals that were involved in his divorce, I being one of them. Ironically, I had left to go on sabbatical and sublet my office to another psychologist. And that was the worst part because this perpetrator went into my office and shot that psychologist. He was looking for me. So that was overwhelming, and that really messes with my brain, and I get intrusive imagery, and when I go to work, sometimes I feel frightened and afraid. So there's, as you go down this list, I'm sure you can think of in the course of your life examples of times when you were experiencing traumatizing events. So what we're going through right now is one example of that. But if you really stop to think about it, I'm sure you could come up with 2 or 3 or more examples of experiencing trauma. Why do I say this? Because in a lot of ways, you're stronger than you think you are, and you're more resilient than you think you are. And sometimes we can go back to these memories and use them as resources of how we stayed strong and how we got through those difficult times. Next slide. So I'm going to give you a very brief tutorial, Neuroscience 101, because the first place trauma lands is within our brain. And people say in the psychology, world, oh, it's all in your mind. Well, it's not all in your mind. It's actually organically all in your brain. And your brain is going through quite a trippy experience when you are taking in a traumatizing event. So I'm going to quickly show you what happens inside our brain and what happens chemically, because many chemicals and hormones are released and they course through our body, and physiologically we are first affected by these things. Next slide. So here's a diagram of the brain. And if you look at the lower part of the brain encased in the red area, this is called the limbic system of our brain. And I know some young people use this term, oh, he went limbic on me, which means, someone really is acting in an intense or an overreactive manner. But this is the part of our brain that makes us the same as all the animals. And this is the part of our brain that for everything we experience, most of the time we're completely unconscious about it, assesses whether what's happening is a danger to us or not. Most of the time it assesses that it is not a danger, and then our neurons go up to our cortex, which makes us different than all the other animals, and then we rationally address whatever is going on. But when we're in a trauma experience, that limbic part, that very primitive part of our brain, becomes activated. And if you'll notice, there's a little almond-shaped structure. It's a dark blue, and there's 2 of them actually. It's called the amygdala. And that is the first part of the brain that gets stimulated to assess whether this is a dangerous event or not. And then that magnet-shaped organ in the brain called the hippocampus is a relay station and draws to it every experience you've had in your life that might relate to what what's going on for you right then and there. And with that gathering of old data, your brain starts to either react or respond to the event that's going on. So are people having trouble hearing me? Are you hearing me fine?
I'm not getting any questions.
Okay, so people are answering. Okay, so let's go. So this is what's happening. And so this is why trauma is in the eyes of the beholder, because for some people, when the amygdala gets stimulated in the middle of a traumatizing event, and the magnet, the hippocampus, starts to draw old events or old memories, there are some of us that have housed in our memory more traumatizing events than others. And that's why some people receive certain events as traumatizing while others don't. Next slide. And so when that starts, and when the amygdala and the hippocampus become stimulated, we start to experience a cascade of chemicals. And our nervous system is made of two parts. The sympathetic nervous system, which helps us to either fight, flight, or freeze in the face of danger, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is calming and tries to counteract the sympathetic nervous system to calm the body down. And if you, oh, I lost it. We'll need to get back to the PowerPoint. There we go. Bear with me. We're on the stress response slide. We need to put it in the presentation mode. There we go. And if you look on this slide, you see a lot of fancy words. Some of them are even longer than hydroxychloroquine. So if you notice that, we have norepinephrine being released, epinephrine that's getting us ready to put the blood to our extremities so we could fight or we could run, while acetylcholine is trying to calm us down. Then corticotropic releasing hormone is going through our body. All these things are happening and where finally it ends up in our adrenal glands, where the ultimate end of chemical reaction is the release of cortisol. And cortisol in high quantities is virtually dangerous to our health and our well-being. Next slide. So when people are in trauma events and they are continue to feel highly anxious, or they're feeling very upset, or they're feeling down, and this ratcheting up and down of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system produces a lot of cortisol. And what scientific research shows, and if you could see the list, the chronic triggering of cortisol can really mess with your physical health. And you see just some of the illnesses. And what's really interesting about that is that it's a statistic that 65% of all primary care physician visits are actually related to psychological issues, to chronic anxiety or a major depression. And these are the physical symptoms that the patient presents with. But when the physician starts to ask more questions, very frequently, they find out that the patient has been under a chronic elevated level of stress. So considering this and studying this is very important, not only for your emotional well-being and your spiritual well-being, but really for your physical health ultimately. Next. And then to sort of make things even more complicated, now we're going to move away from the limbic brain, the primitive brain, and go up to your cerebral cortex. This is the modern brain, man's brain. And the cerebral cortex is separated into two hemispheres. And I'm sure you've heard people say, oh, she's a very right-brain person. And what are right-brain people? You know, they're very creative, they're intuitive, tend to be nonverbal. It's also really a very spiritual area of our brain because it's where the boundary between you and the other person sort of blends together, and you have that feeling of community and connectedness. At the same time, our negative emotions that start out in that limbic area go charge through our right brain, and then you'll see that word that's written vertically. It goes through a bundle of nerves that connects the right brain to the left brain called the corpus callosum. And the negative emotion neurons just flood over to the left side of our brain where we're rational and concrete and verbal, and our positive emotions run through that part of our brain. Well, when we're very anxious or when we're very depressed and it's chronic and it keeps happening over and over again through trauma, that corpus callosum becomes overloaded and there's a flooding of negative feelings over into the left brain, and it becomes difficult to stay clear, to respond to what's going on rather than react. And what studies show is that when people are under chronic trauma, that sheathing of the bundle of nerves called the corpus callosum actually thins out. And so the neurons just course through fast and furious. And so our ability to navigate through those feelings and thoughts can become compromised. Next slide. And so over time, and we've been experiencing this now, you know, one day we're hopeful, one day we're, you know, afraid to go out, another day we feel afraid to stay in. We wonder what's going to happen to the economy. We wonder what's going to happen to our retirement plan. Will our children be okay? Will we get sick? So we're constantly looping around that stress loop. And over time, we start to develop some psychological effects. Maybe we numb out, right? So, you know, people, some kids, like my grandkids, they've been doing a lot of gaming than they normally do. They're numbing out to what's going on around them. Sometimes we become hypersensitive or hyper aroused. We see somebody sneeze, we kind of freak out. Or vigilant. That's my trip. I get hyper vigilant. Cleaning, disinfecting, washing my hands. We start to feel anxious. Our anxiety is elevated all the time, which is important to understand. I'd like to define anxiety. Anxiety is fear unfelt. So we really feel afraid that we're going to get sick, that maybe we're going to die, or something's going to happen to our loved ones, or many other things at the same time. But what anxiety is a state, not a feeling. And we go to anxiety rather than sit with our fear and face our fear. Hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that. Our sleep can become disturbed. So my circadian rhythms during this time of quarantine have been completely shifted. I'm up at 4 in the morning and I'm sleepy and ready to go to bed at 7 o'clock at night. I never had that type of experience before, and I'm sure it's probably due to what's going on in my brain. A lot of exhaustion and chronic fatigue, even though we're not necessarily working really hard or moving very much, there's that low level of depression that makes our energy feel low. It also makes us more open. It taxes our immune system. And so you have, you know, while you may not get COVID, and I certainly hope and pray that no one does, but you can open yourself up to other physical illnesses. One of the things I notice right now are that my allergies are very intense this year, and I'm sure the stress has taxed my immunological system, and so I'm more vulnerable to be reactive to things like dust and the spring blossoms and all that type of thing. And then, of course, there's the nightmare of intrusive imagery. And if you spend too much time on TV where you're watching those circular news reels, it's really going to be hard to get some of those images out of your head. And so you may be seeing it in your mind or thinking it in your mind. And what does that do? It starts that chemical reaction in your brain all over again. Next slide, please. So then on top of everything else, if you live with anxiety and feel despair or you feel low, you start to get into what I call stinking thinking just about yourself. A lot of people that I've talked to and I work with through this time get very upset because they don't feel they have a purpose, or they'll spend a day doing a jigsaw puzzle, and at the end of the day, they start shooting on themselves because they weren't productive. They didn't do something better, and they start to just bear down on themselves and become very judgmental. We're also at risk to get into black and white thinking. You know, this is right, this is wrong. And the politicizing around this issue has made it even more traumatizing. And remember, that flood of neurons from the right cortex to the left cortex keeps our thinking cloudy. Then we can sometimes jump to conclusions because we react rather than respond. We start to see things negatively and we forget to remember the positive things that are going on, the blessings we have in our life. Our ability to be emotionally intelligent gets very taxed at this time. And then we start to catastrophize a little bit. So, you know, if somebody comes into my office and they're coughing, I'm sitting on my chair, bracing myself because I'm thinking, oh, that person has it. And if that person doesn't have it, they probably have an allergy. But we start to overreact to some of these things. And so taking care of yourself and keeping yourself centered and keeping yourself peaceful and being gentle onto yourself is very important, so you do not get into being judgmental about your struggles during this challenging time. Next slide. So if you go back, if you try to remember that brain picture I showed you in the beginning, you'll remember that I said some of us, when the amygdala gets stimulated and the hippocampus draws in our older memories, those are what we call triggers. And some of us have more triggers than others. So spending some time going over your history, you don't have to belabor it, you don't have to psychoanalyze it, but just kind of review it. And think about some times in the course of your life where you received an event that's traumatizing, because that gets triggered in the mix with what's going on right now, and it makes it even more difficult to cope. So not only do those memories get triggered, the feeling states associated with those triggers come up to the surface, and the body memories around that. You can physiologically even feel it right inside your body. And so it makes coping during a traumatizing time like this even more challenging and difficult. So recognizing and knowing your triggers and breathing through them and dealing with them and reframing them is very important for staying centered and peaceful during this time. Next slide. Here we go. Is it happening? Oh, no, there was one before that. If you could turn, there's one before, the next one. Please go to the next, there, no, yeah, no, 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 no. Next one. It's right after this. There you go. So for those of us, and you know, I came out when I started chatting with you, I gave you a whole litany of traumatizing experiences in my 67 years that I have had to digest in my body. And it's very important to consider this graph, this picture I'm showing you, because When the door comes open on disorganized trauma memories, it's like a really messy closet, and all this stuff that's kind of stuffed in there just falls out, and it's a mess, and you feel overwhelmed, and you try to stuff it back and shove the door closed. But if you just brush against the door when you're in a current trauma experience, it all comes out. Whereas if you looked at the other side of the picture, you have the ability to start to categorize those memories, just like the clothes. You fold them up nice and neat, you put them in place, you put them in piles, so they're in there, but they're controlled. So you can't get rid of a trauma memory. You can only shift how you choose to perceive it and how you choose to respond to it when it's triggered. Next slide. Which one? So in my doctoral dissertation, what I wrote about was a process for dealing with trauma called a rapid advance process, and it has 5 steps. You can read about this in our book. My co-author is Vicki Carpel-Miller, called Secondhand Shock. And this process we developed it to treat trauma. We already talked about, think about your history. Identify what your triggers are that can get thrown into the mix during the traumatizing time now. Organize those painful memories. Put them back in the closet, nice and neat, by saying, that happened then, it isn't happening now. And though I was really upset then, I'm going to forgive that past. I'm going to release that past. I'm going to relinquish judgment of that past, and I'm going to put peace on it. Once you do that, you become aware when you're in a fearful state rather than distract yourself with anxiety, and you're able to respond to fear with any number of exercises or activities that resonate for you and respond for you. Prayer is a big one for me. Meditation is very important. I love knitting. So when you respond to fear, that right cortex is really able to enjoy its spiritual nature and its ability to appreciate how we are all connected, how we are all one unit, and how we are boundless in our ability to be present. Next slide. And so there are many activities to overcome stress. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, I hope you will maybe participate and offer up what you do to stay centered and peaceful. But one thing I can promise you of all these things, the most basic activity to learn to overcome anxiety, depression during traumatizing times is to spend some time enriching your emotional intelligence. It's very, very important. People have 3 dimensions to their life. They have an emotional experience, they have a thinking experience, and they have a behaving experience. So building your ability to become aware of your feeling states when they are triggered, to step up and regulate those feeling states, to get compassionate, to put yourself in the shoes of the other person who may be struggling, and to find a way to stay in community, to stay connected, even though it's challenging, through your church, through Zoom meetings, through online types of activities, family members that are in your home, staying with you, taking time not to isolate within the home. So that is a wonderful way to begin to overcome the anxiety, stress, and the despair sometimes we feel during traumatizing times such as this. So we're going to turn it to people to ask questions in a second. I just would like to go to the last slide before we do that. I just have up there some basic resources. There's a crisis hotline if things really get out of control and you're in panic, when anxiety turns to panic, or despair or depression turns to suicidal ideation or thinking, get on a crisis hotline. If you have complex trauma. There are some excellent resources in today's world. EMDR treatment is something you could research online. It's an incredible process that literally helps rewire your brain to get out of that vicious stress loop. Counseling is always a wonderful thing. Look for alternative medicines, and also when you are stressed for very long periods of time, your brain starts having chronically low serotonin, and serotonin is very necessary organically in our brain for us to stay peaceful and calm in difficult situations. And there are certain medications that can help your brain keep more of its own natural serotonin. Also, if anyone wants to ever speak to me personally, I'm more than happy to chat with you, and there's my number below. So now we'll field some questions. Do we have any?
Yes, we do have two questions. I think primarily would be best answered by Reverend Elizabeth. The first one comes from Abraham, and he says that I am a chaplain, now completing my second CPE unit. I have a dream or hunch to serve in what I call chaplaincy without borders, or chaplaincy in the trenches. Rationale: to address post-coronavirus trauma that right now is calling for spiritual and emotional support. Focus would be on offering chaplaincy services to address emotional and spiritual impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. I do not know how or where to begin. However, my prayer is that this will happen sooner than later. Compassion and empathy are God's gifts to me, and they both inform my theology of spiritual care. Any thoughts? Thank you, Abraham, and I do have an email also.
Well, if I could just mention one thing before we turn it over to Reverend Elizabeth, who's certainly much more qualified to answer this question, is that that is an excellent articulation, because there is no question that mental health issues are going to continue that have sprung from COVID long after COVID is resolved. The mental health issues that we are starting to experience will really endure longer than our trauma with the virus itself. So yes, that was very well articulated.
And I'll just say that thank you, Abraham, for sharing that dream with us. And it sounds like it's God's dream too. And we will pray with you and love to hear more about it.
Do we have another question?
Yes, again, this is probably for Reverend Elizabeth. The question is, will we have a recording of this conference, or will there be a charge?
So no, there is no charge. And will there be a recording? It looks like we're recording now. At one point when I looked at it, we weren't recording. So I don't know. I hope we will have a recording. And if we do, let me give my email address, and you can email me if you would, if you don't see, you can always go to our website. If we have a recording, we're going to put it on the website. But my email address is Elizabeth@St. Barnabas, and St. Barnabas is spelled out, .org. Elizabeth@stbarnabas.org. So to be determined.
Okay. I think we have a few more questions.
We do, and for some reason, I'm having trouble getting out. Well, let's see. Bear with me just a minute here. Okay, very good. Okay. Somehow I have Abraham's question, and even though
Because I see 13 questions.
yes, I do too. The issue is that I continue to go into Abraham's question, even though we've answered live and it's done. Now, okay, here we go. He said he's based in Columbus, as a side note, came back. Okay, this question is from Wynn Maxwell. Can you go back to the slide of the chaotic closet? Ellie?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Go
Okay.
right back. Yes. So when many of us are having what would be called post-traumatic stress syndrome, and we will have it after this because we're actually still in the middle of the trauma. And we're scared of a lot of things. And at those of us who have historical trauma as well, those traumatic memories are also in the mix. So if you look at that closet like it was your mind, your cache of memories, your cache of traumatizing events, they start to become, if you remember the brain diagram, they become flooded and full of just a mess of stuff. Your thinking is clouded and you can't make any sense of it and you feel overwhelmed. Whereas if you spend some time taking it out and parsing out what are old traumas, what are old painful memories, let me take those out. I'm going to fold them up. They're going on the bottom shelf. Then I'm going to take this group of, and I'm going to put them on the next shelf. So what you're doing is reframing those memories and not giving them the power that they are usurping from you on their own. So you're having those memories, they're not having you. They're categorized, you know they're there, but you're in control of them. So that's the best way to describe that diagram.
Okay.
Next question.
We have a question from Hobbit. They say that they volunteer at church with elderly group and they are resistant or uncomfortable using Zoom. We tried it last month. And he was wondering, or she, is there any specialized resources to assist or support the elderly who are in isolation?
So I really can't answer that directly as far other than people that will meet with them in person. And I'm actually one of them. Right before the church closed down as a lay chaplain, I reached out to a lady in a nursing home, and when I went to bring her communion and I knocked on her door, she had a cough and she was sick in bed, and I became anxious and afraid, but I hung tough. I breathed through it. I said, okay. She says, I don't feel well. I said, okay, do you still want communion? She said, yes, I do. And so I went in and I put myself in God's hands and spent a very lovely and wonderful time with her. You have to find a way to help people. I cannot see all my clients on Zoom. You need to read their energy. You need to read their body language. You need to be in the space with them. So you can, if you are fastidious with either wearing a mask, wearing gloves, using your hand sanitizer, keeping a distance, I had to go back to my office. I guess I'm called an essential worker, which that phrase bothers me. I think all workers are essential because our economy needs every one of them. But I had to venture out into my office before quarantine was lifted. And I felt so anxious the night before I had to go in, but I just breathed through it and I faced my fear. I moved through my fear. And after I did it the first time, I've gotten better at it and I'm doing okay. And I'm not too worried that I'm going to get sick. So you have to find a way to be with them and keep yourself safe at the same time. And there are, the CDC has very excellent protocols that you should follow to keep some sort of barrier between you and the other person.
I just want to jump in and say a couple things, and one is that that we and somebody said this in the chat, that we do cards and calling, and that's a great way. Just pick up the telephone and connect with people. If you're local Hobbit, you might try Duet, which is an organization that provides a lot of services to seniors, that they may have some services that you're looking for, but just wanted to suggest that in the Valley. Duet.
And that population is considered the frontline workers, and they are being traumatized themselves. Next question.
Well, one other comment from the audience was that they actually do porch visits with some of the isolated elderly. Just another idea.
They keep the distance. You can still visit and keep the distance, yes.
Our next question is from Barb, who's a member of our mental health task force here at St. Barnabas, and she's asking, how can each of us be of help to others during this time?
There are so many ways to answer that question, and I think that is such a loving and beautiful question, because one of the best ways to deal with your own anxiety or your own feelings of depression is to reach out and help other people and practice compassion. So I have been making more phone calls to people in my extended friendships and association and extended family than I have before, more texting. We've done Zoom meetings. Actually, in a lot of ways, we've actually reunited with a lot of people that we tend to ignore in our old life, our regular daily life. So there's tremendous resources online, ways you can connect online. Letter writing has become a very interesting practice. I'm sending more cards. And so a person can, open a card and get a lovely thought from that. Or send some food, send a meal. There's so many ways that you can do that. But the key, it's really less about what you do. It's the practice of empathy and compassion that is so win-win, healthy for you and healthy for the other person, and is so healing in times of trauma. So that's just an excellent point to bring up.
Okay, another participant, Elizabeth Smith, asks, will we be able to get slides of your presentation, Ellie?
If you contact me by email, you can contact me by email, and I will be happy to share this slide presentation with you.
Okay.
And I hope people are looking on the chat tab, because there's so many excellent ideas. People have taken the time to write in about what they do to stay centered, and what they do to stay healthy and peaceful. And so to hope people take a little bit of time to look that over. Do we have any other questions?
We do. This one is from Ann Rice Yeager. What do you do to reduce your anxiety?
So what I do personally, I'll tell you what I do personally. I knit. And I have, during this time of quarantine, I have absolutely amazed myself. I have put together some incredible pieces. My daughter is getting married next October, and I knit her a lace shawl with glass beads, just knit right into the pattern. It came out beautifully, and if I didn't have this time, I wouldn't have been able to put that together. So knitting is a very great activity. For some people, it's gardening. For some people, it's doing home projects. I've done a lot more cooking than I have ever done, and baking than I've ever done, typically, because I'm a career person, and I get a little cranky, and my deal's always been, if I've worked all day, I'm certainly not going to cook when I come home. But with the change in schedule, I've really enjoyed trying new recipes and putting new things together. And I've also enjoyed organizing my home. It's helped me to organize my mind. And I've weeded through stuff and cleaned stuff, and it's been very fulfilling. I have found during this time more than ever that cleanliness is next to godliness. That really has resonated. So when I clean, I feel as though I'm really connecting spiritually. It's been very calming for me.
Another question from an anonymous attendee. Would you have any tips to deal with a general sense of futility so we can keep motivated? Even though I find purpose in my work and volunteering, it just seems so small and without impact right now.
Yeah, and we spoke a little bit about this in the presentation, and that is of the feelings of futility lead us to sometimes feeling despair. But one thing I would really suggest you have a look at is a book by Viktor Frankl. It's an old book. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. And it is a very intricate story of how he survived the horrors of being in a concentration camp and how he found meaning in very small things. So, it's a big world, but it's also a little molecule. And maybe now it's time for us to get more molecular and see the loveliness in very small things and take time to notice the beauty in that. And it's maybe in a convoluted way, it's a gift that we're afforded that opportunity to find meaning in very small things.
Okay, the next question is from Bob King. Has the left brain, right brain bicameral mind model, somehow my question, okay, there we are, sorry about that. I'll start again. Has the left brain, right brain bicameral mind model been somewhat problematized, i.e., the idea of the extended mind, which may have a somewhat different approach to trauma? And that again is from Bob King.
Okay, so I'm going to simply say, I don't know the answer to that question, but it sure makes me curious, and it has motivated me to look a little further into that. I just know one thing for sure, bicamerally in the brain, that trauma and chronic stress compromises the ability for our neurons to, in a balanced way, go back and forth between the two hemispheres. But I'm certainly motivated to look into that a little further.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Ann Holt. She's asking, compassion for self, is that the best starting point for treatment? Compassion for self.
Well, being gentle onto oneself, that takes us back to that slide that chronic anxiety in times of trauma leads us to stinking thinking about ourselves. And yes, you have to stay exceedingly mindful and deliberate not to be hard on yourself right now, not to be judgmental and self-critical. Quiet the voice of your inner critic. We all have an inner critic. And for a lot of people I've been talking to and working with, their inner critic is at full speed ahead. you should be doing more work. You're not productive enough. You're lazy. You look terrible. And so, you know, you wash your hair, you know, right now is really, if there ever was a time to quiet the voice of the inner critic, this would be it. And so pay attention that it's jabbering at you, and turn into dialogue and tell it to just quiet down right now. And being gentle with yourself always opens the way for empathy and compassion to others.
Okay, next question from Jackie. Can you say more about the 5 R's, specifically responding to fear and releasing the past?
I really can't. I can say a little more about it, but the rapid advance process is a process that goes in 5 stages, and there's really no way in the short period of time I could actually address that part. What's important is that when we forgive painful memories of our past, we are unburdened. Forgiveness is really for the forgiver. The forgivee reaps the benefit of that, but we are unburdened. So when you are mindful of painful memories that you carry, how they get triggered during stressful times in the here and now, you're given another opportunity to release those painful memories by relinquishing your judgment of them. They weren't bad, they weren't good, they just were. And they're not happening now. That has nothing, a memory has no more power over me than a memory. It's how I choose to perceive it and how I choose to compartmentalize it, where I put it in the closet. I have power over that. And so that is a very, very important part of noticing when where something fearful is before us. It empowers us to notice we feel afraid, and rather than get triggered by old memories, we can respond to fear rather than get reactive by going into anxiety. We breathe through it, we pray through it, we release it, we get involved in activities that help us meet it and rise above it. And in so doing, that spiritual part of the right-hand part of our brain starts working more productively.
Okay. Another anonymous question. I'm hearing a lot of stored trauma coming out in the folks I listen to, triggered by current events.
Oh, yes.
What are your suggestions for management for myself and for my folks?
Well, the most important thing you can do for the folks you work with is to take care of yourself. And really spend some time researching and understanding the impact that vicarious trauma is having on you. You're digesting that trauma with them because you're a compassion specialist, and compassion specialists work with their people, hearing their stories as if it were happening to them. And so your brain goes into a whole chemical tailspin of its own. So you just have to really take care of yourself regarding the absorption of trauma, and then you'll be able to be more objective when you work with others.
Okay, next question. What are the common issues of your typical patient client versus that of a general therapist? This question is from Wynn Maxwell.
Well, I'm sorry, I really don't quite understand that question. Clients, generally speaking, are dealing with some level of anxiety and or depression, and it comes out sometimes in milder forms, or it comes out in more intense forms, which changes their diagnosis up into a different category. However, all clients that when they come over my threshold have some level and intensity of underlying anxiety and or depression, but some require higher levels of treatment.
Okay. This was more of a comment to Abraham from Priscilla. She says, Abraham, this discussion makes me think of the possibility of us experiencing post-traumatic spiritual stress syndrome. Our faith has been threatened.
Shaken, yes, it's been shaken, and it's harder to stay in connection, lean into your spirituality when the same part of your brain is full of negative feelings and worries. But it's a practice, okay? Knitting is a practice, prayer is a practice, meditation is practice. You have to spend time doing that repetitively, and that builds its own neural pathway in your brain, so your neurons don't get hijacked into the trauma direction. But it takes just like yoga is a practice, and so you have to repeat these behaviors, the positive behaviors, the calming behaviors, and that literally shifts the way your brain is wired.
Okay, just a couple housekeeping details. Ellie, if you can give the audience your email address to get the PowerPoint, and then also, yes, there were 2 requests for that.
No worries. So my email address is all lowercase letters. It's ellieizzophd@gmail.com. ELLIEIZZOPHD@gmail.com.
Okay, and finally from Hobbit again is asking, could we have a follow-up which could be more interactive, offering support to each other as professional caregivers? Maybe a topic for a future.
Oh, that would be my privilege to do that. And we have had such wonderful questions, such great curiosities about this. We would probably have a very lively meeting. It would be very good.
Okay. I think that pretty much does it for the questions I have. Just maybe a question to the audience. Is there any other questions before we conclude this portion?
There was a question that came in through the chat asking if there are any other book recommendations that you have.
Well, the one book that I have, or if people are looking to become more spiritually enriched, who are struggling with negative feelings and feel that barrier between themselves and their spirituality, you might want to look up some books on that. I have a book called The Bridge to I Am, which really showcases the rapid advance process. That's a good book. And I love the book The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. It's just such a source of comfort in any time of trouble. And we are on a road less traveled right now, so it's extremely relevant reading.
Okay, I think I did miss one here from Jackie. No, I'm sorry. Now it's gone. Sorry about that. We're down to 2 questions. Someone must be deleting them because I wasn't deleting them. So
we're pretty, we're pretty much close to wrapping up, and
okay.
I certainly want to close with a prayer, which will Reverend Elizabeth will be so kind. I just want to take, before I hand it over, just take the time to thank everyone so much for finding it a priority to take this hour and learn a few things and gain some insights as to what's going on in the brain and in the body and through these very challenging times. And I wish you all the very, very best. If anyone has any need to talk a little further, please feel free to contact me. It's been a privilege to serve.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ellie. And, you know, I was thinking about, because our registration, we had that hiccup with Zoom and registration. I don't think we have everybody's email address. We certainly know how to get in touch with people at St. Barnabas. So why don't I give my email address one more time, and if you would like to be, if we want to gather up a contact list of who was here. You can email me at Elizabeth, that's ELIZABETH, at stbarnabas.org. And Saint Barnabas is spelled out, stbarnabas.org. Email me. You can find my email on our website as well. And you can contact me with your email so we can start, name an email so we can start a contact list. So thank you. So before I close us, I wanted to thank our mental health task force for the wonderful work that they do at St. Barnabas. I want to thank them by name. Susan Peach, Kathy Kutsha, who was with us doing the questions, Sarah Colmark, who you didn't see, but she was behind the scenes making this all possible. Thank you, Sarah. Jane Parkinson and Barb Husick. So thank you to that group for the wonderful work they do at St. Barnabas. And I'm going to close by reading a psalm. I'm going to close by reading Psalm 91. So join me in prayer. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High abides under the shadow of the Almighty. He shall say to the Lord, "You are my refuge and my stronghold, my God in whom I put my trust." He shall deliver you from the snare of the hunter and from the deadly pestilence. He shall cover you with his pinions, and you shall find refuge under his wings. His faithfulness shall be a shield and buckler. You shall not be afraid of any terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by day, of the plague that stalks in the darkness, nor of the sickness that lays waste in midday. 1,000 shall fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. Your eyes have only to behold and see the reward of the wicked, because you have made the Lord your refuge, and the Most High your habitation. There shall no evil happen to you, neither shall any plague come near your dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over you, to keep you in all your ways. They shall bear you in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone. You shall tread upon the lion and adder. You shall trample the young lion and the serpent under your feet. Because he is bound to me in love, therefore will I deliver him. I will protect him because he knows my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I am with him in trouble. I will rescue him and bring him to honor. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. God's peace to you this day and always. Amen. All right, we'll see you later.
One quick request. Someone wanted Dr. Ellie's email.
I think it was, we gave it before. It's Ellie Izzo, PhD @gmail.com. And Ellie has an E on the end, so it's ELLIE, and Izzo is IZZO, and then PhD @gmail.com.
Thanks. It was just a final question that came through. Thank you.
Okay. All right. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye. Thank you.